Hello, bruvs. We're back with Heinz Ewers Vampire, a 1934 translation of the book. We're on chapter 5, Turquoises. Let me open. Let's me open it, bruv. Let me open the live chat. Turquoises. His secretary put the revolver in the traveling bag. No, Frank Braun said, leave it here. I won't need it. He hesitated, holding the weapon in his hand. Wait, I might be able to use it as a gift. It would make a fine present down there. Again, he hesitated. But not this one. It is a German army pistol, and they shan't say of us that we smuggle arms across the Rio Grande. Since the Yankees themselves supply the Mexicans with all their arms, I too can bring them American products. There, down in that drawer, are enough Smith & Wessons. Take half a dozen, and don't forget the cartridges, 5 boxes for each gun. Shall I call your friends now? Rosius asked. You'll want to say goodbye to them. Frank Braun nodded. Yes, call them. Did you ask them to come? Oh, yes, all 3 of them are waiting outside, the secretary laughed. What a touching scene it will be. He went out to the window, pulled back the curtains, and waved to someone outside. He was a young Austrian, slim and bright-eyed, and in spite of his youth, he was only 23, capable and intelligent. Sometimes when girls were on his mind, he was distracted and a bit careless, but he could pull himself together when necessary and handle the most delicate situations, and that was what was needed in this position. Ernst Rosius had run away from the college and roamed over 3 continents as a newspaperman and interpreter, as steward, trimmer, and stevedore. Now he was stranded in the United States like countless others. He had come to Frank Braun one day seeking a job. Recommendations? Frank Braun asked. This was always his first question with every visitor. Then he would take the letters, and pretend to read them while the other man talked. That gave him time to form his own judgment. Here, the young man had said quickly. He reached into his pocket and produced a sheaf of papers. They were lyrical poems. Each was signed and bore a date. Nice recommendations you have. Good God, Frank Braun said disapprovingly, but he read them. It was bad poetry, the thoughts immature and influenced by other writers, and yet here and there a cadence, a word only, spelled an individuality. What can you do? Frank Braun asked. Everything or nothing, depending on how you look at it. I can do everything and nothing properly. Frank Braun liked the answer. All right, he smiled. Stay if you like. And so he had stayed. The detectives came in. They were aghast when they saw the open trunks. Usually, when Frank Braun went away for 2 or 3 days, he took only a suitcase. In the beginning, before he had made friends with the detectives, one of them had always followed him on his trips, but later they were merely told where he was going and where he would speak. So they had stayed in New York, accepting his own report and pocketing the fat traveling expenses. But this time it looked different. How long are you going to be away? The tall one asked suspiciously. A month, maybe 6 weeks. Oh, that long? But why? Where was he going? He needed a rest, he said. That was all. He must be alone. He wanted to work undisturbed. He was going to the country, to the seashore. But they did not believe a word of it. Oh, they knew what he was going to do. They knew it better than he thought they did. He was going to Canada, of course, to blow up the Welland Canal or some railroad bridge. The newspapers were full of these things. The attempts had failed several times, but they knew these Germans. They would try again and again until the short fat one lifted up the leather bag, heavy, very heavy. Dynamite? He asked with awe. They begged and pleaded with him. He should spare himself, for God's sake. The Kaiser would get along without him. He was a fool to risk his life like this, and if those damned Canadians should catch him, he would be put before a firing squad as a spy. They would never forgive themselves that they had not warned him and protected him better. They were so fond of him. And of your good job, he laughed. Then a messenger boy came and brought a great bunch of red roses with a note from Ivy Jefferson, from little fair haired Ivy Jefferson, with whom Frank Braun had been flirting for some months. He knew her parents. Her mother was as important a figure on Fifth Avenue as her father in Wall Street. He took the roses out of the box. They smelled fresh and sweet, like the young flesh on Ivy's neck. Frank Braun smiled. The roses were a good sign. Ivy had become genuinely attached to him, and more than that, she had won over her mother and father, too, who did whatever this spoilt child of 18 wanted. But behind them stood a score and more of other families. This was excellent protection, just in case something should go amiss down there. They all stood behind him against their better judgment, forced over to his side by his one weapon, Ivy. Hello, bruvs. Her coming out party in February, everybody who belonged had been there. The creme de la creme. Several years ago in London, old Mr. Jefferson had casually invited him to it. You must come to her debut, and Frank Braun had answered in the same way, why, of course, I shall certainly come. And now here in New York one morning, Tews brought him the newspaper emblazoned with Ivy's picture. Ivy Jefferson makes her bow to society. Yes, that was much more important than all the battles in Poland or France. I'm reading the book Vampire by Heinz Ewers. Didn't you say once that you know the Jeffersons? The newspaper man asked. Have you called on them yet? Frank Braun said he had not. Well, then you must go there today at once. He rushed Frank Braun down to Wall Street, to Mr. Jefferson's office in the Jefferson Bank. Tews waited outside, pacing up and down with long strides until Frank Braun came out. Well, what is it? He asked. Has he invited you? Yes, he has, Frank Braun answered, but he did not enjoy doing it, I can assure you. I believe you, the newspaper man chortled. Only allies will be present, ammunition people and loan brokers. You will be the only German, I am positive. He rubbed his hands in glee. I can imagine the face old man Jefferson made, sweet and sore and embarrassed, and yet polite. He knew it would be wrong, whatever he did. If he had not invited you, his dear spouse would have given him hell for his tactlessness and cowardice, and now that he has asked you, she will blame him for exactly the same reasons. He lighted a long cigar and blew smoke in heavy clouds. But now comes the main thing, Doctor. You must flirt with the Jefferson girl for all you are worth, outshine all her beaux, because that kid holds many strings in her hand, or will hold them someday, even if she doesn't know it yet. Today she probably doesn't care either way. British or German, you must win her over to our side. That girl can be very useful to us, or to you, someday. You see? He talked on and on. He explained in quick sentences how the Jefferson Bank worked openly and behind the scenes, and that the financial wizard and his wife would do everything to please their little daughter. How do you know all this? Frank Braun asked. Tews stopped and waved his long arms. Do you think I have been a political newspaper man in New York for the past 23 years for nothing? In Europe, you must know the authorities. Here, you have to know families. Frank Braun got his invitation. He went for Tews' sake, and more so because Lottie Van Ness urged him to go. He is right, she said. He is perfectly right. Flirt with the girl. Show what you can do. Take her. Give her her first kisses. Kisses without emotion, he objected. Nonsense. What does that matter? Kisses are kisses, whether genuine or not. It was not hard to compete against the men there. A few decrepit French bankers and diplomats who were quite amusing but did not count even their English was impossible. Then Italian artists, painters, and singers, but all second class, loud mannered, and yet servile, and many Englishmen, of course, well educated but cold and without any sense of humor. They were entertaining, polite, and obliging, but always with that offending air of, how good of me to come and honor you, trash. And there were naturally many Americans, tall young boys with splendid figures, sons of the best families. What a contrast to the hollow cheeked, narrow chested, flat footed millions which the subway spits out from the bowels of the earth. Day in, day out, they were Harvard, Yale, and Princeton men who rode and boxed, rode horseback and drove speedboats, played baseball and football and polo, and who were equally as good at hockey as at tennis, and who unquestionably wore their tailcoats as easily as their polo shirts. There were no Jews, not a single one. The Kaiser might ask Mr. Ballin, or is it Ballin, for breakfast, and the King of England, Sir Ernest Cassel. But this was an American house, one of the best. Not even the wealthiest Jew could ever have crossed this threshold. It was easier to think of the Tsar of Russia having tea with Baron Gunsberg and playing bridge with Mr. Mandelbaum than of a Jew being admitted here. Even Frank Braun was a near outcast here, he, the German. Ivy Jefferson stood beside her parents with a large bouquet of white orchids in her arms, receiving the visitors. She shook hands with over 400 people and spoke a few words to each one. Frank Braun came late, bowed to her, and shook hands. He remembered having heard from her father that she understood German, so he spoke to her in his own language. Her father noticed it. He made a long face and looked meaningly at his wife. Then he gave Frank Braun a very reproachful look and greeted him with marked coolness in English. Frank Braun answered politely but curtly and turned again to Ivy. He said, smiling in a loud voice, "Shall I speak English? Your father is terribly embarrassed because someone speaks German in his house." Little Ivy answered in German, in slow and clumsy German, but yet in German. "This is my day. Speak German." "Thank you," Frank Braun said, and turned aside. But she held him back intentionally, so everyone should notice it. She was grown up now. She had been in society for an hour and was now independent of everyone, and particularly of her parents. She had to prove it, and this was her first opportunity. "Just to say something," she continued. "Everybody has told me something nice about how I look. You haven't said a word. How do you like me?" He measured her in the tenth of a second. "Very much," he said slowly, "very much. Only your maid isn't very good." "Why?" she asked. "You have a pimple there on your shoulder, just a tiny one. What are mooches for?" Or is that mouches? Mouches for. He noticed how she blushed under her makeup and powder. Her eyes showed offense and hurt. Then she glanced furtively at her shoulder and bit her lower lip. "Oh," she whispered. She turned sharply and left him standing there, and offered him and she offered her slim hand to the next comer. He moved away and lost himself in the crowd, thinking the episode over. He wondered for an instant if it had been wise. Then he nodded to himself in satisfaction. He thought, yes, it was good. She has shaken hands with 200 men, and they all said the same thing. She will remember me. He sat at a table in the Gothic dining room, drank a little, and talked with indifferent people. Then he went to the Winter Garden with them, and from there into the ballroom. He stood on one side all by himself and watched the crowd. They danced well, these American boys. They danced smoothly back and forth, making always the same steps, dispassionately, unemotionally, infinitely bored, but gracefully and tirelessly, for hours. Frank Braun stood and waited. She danced past him twice, 5 times, many times, and she looked over at him without a sign of recognition. Now and then she would sit down for a few minutes, and it seemed to him then that her eyes were beckoning to him, inviting at first, then indignant, then commanding. Why didn't he ask her to dance? He just stood quietly and motionlessly, eyes on the dancers, and waited. It was not a pose with him, far from it. He just did not care. He thought, she will come. Again she danced past him, and just then the music stopped. She returned with her partner, brushed Frank Braun's shoulder, stopped, and turned to him. Here, look, she said. There was a tiny black spot on her shoulder. That's nice of you, he nodded. She introduced her tall young partner, and the men shook hands and offered each other cigarettes. Then she took Frank Braun's arm and sent the other on his way. Don't you dance? She asked. No. I'm a bit tired. I would like a sherbet. Would you come with me? Now was his opportunity. Now. But he could think of nothing to say, and so remained silent. He thought, if two saw me now, ass, he would say, fool. Once more she tried to start a conversation. Do you mind if we speak English when we are alone? It's so much easier for me. He nodded, just as you like. Again, a pause. He brought her an ice, and they sat down at a little table almost hidden in a corner. And again she began, This is the way I thought you were, very reserved, sometimes this way and sometimes otherwise. Thought? He asked. When have you thought about it? Yesterday, she laughed. Father and mother quarreled about you. You are dangerous. You are a conspirator. Oh, no, he said. I am really quite harmless. She shook her head. No, she cried. You are not. Mother's secretary comes from Vienna. She knows about you. Mother asked her all about you. Then she warned me. He looked up, and she smiled. That's why I'm sitting here. He did not answer, but kept looking at her steadily for a long time, without listening to her chatter. She had dark blonde hair combed back in long waves. Her eyebrows seemed a little too heavy, but she had beautiful gray eyes and a small, well-shaped nose. There was a nervous quiver in her nostrils. Her mouth was small and her upper lip well curved. Her neck was slightly long, her shoulders sloped too much and were not full enough, and her chest was too flat, much too flat. And yet she was pretty, so very young, and an early blossom. Why do you keep staring at me? She cried. Why don't you say something? His eyes met hers, and she was silent now, as he was. What do you want? She finally asked. He did not take his eyes from her. I came here for your sake. She started to laugh, but broke off sharply. For your sake, he repeated. Someone came and asked her to dance, so he said, though it sounded like a question, I am leaving. She rose and gave him her hand. Then she said, come for tea on the day after tomorrow. I shall take a drink of water. Again he looked at the roses, American beauties, each stem 3 feet long. He inhaled their scent, then he laid them down on the table, reached for her note, and opened the envelope. He had gone to Ivy Jefferson's for tea. He had been alone with her, except once when her mother had come in for a few minutes. No, he had not made love to Ivy. Decidedly not. He had not been nice to her. He had not flattered her. But his green eyes could be intriguing sometimes when he happened to have his day, and it had been his day that time. With light fingers he had stroked her hand and her arm. They became friends. He came there twice a week, or even 3 times. They went to the opera together, and he rode horseback with her. I go there much too often, he thought. She takes up too much of my time. But she said, you don't come often enough. You are my beau, and you should come every day. She had to have a beau, like every New York society woman. That was understood. But she, Ivy Jefferson, took a German in these days. Her father did not approve of it, and her mother even less so. But they accustomed themselves to it, and Mrs. Alice Jefferson, her beau, was the English consul general, told everyone that she thought it very smart and very courageous. Really, very courageous. More than that, they became genuinely fond of him. They did not pretend. They really liked him and got used to him. Ivy's will had done that. Once her mother had tried to speak seriously to her about it. Why a German? She asked. Shall I have an Italian? Her daughter retorted. Make myself ridiculous? No, of course not. Not a Dago. But there were so many Englishmen, Canadians, Frenchmen, Belgians, and Russians. It was out of the question, however, that it be an American. Ivy had inherited that from her mother, the instinctive, suspicious disrespect for the men of her country, an attitude she shared with many societal women. Frank Braun read Ivy's letter, 3 pages in her bold handwriting. It was mean of him to go away, she said, very mean indeed. Why wasn't he coming with them to Newport instead? And he must not imagine that she would not find out where he was going. She would find out, even if it should cost her $50,000. That alarmed him, and he sat down at once to write to her. If she took one single step to trace him, she would never see him again. He had his reasons, and if she were clever, she would understand that. He thanked her for the roses. He would take them along. He would be back soon. He slipped his note into an envelope and wrote the address. Then he called his secretary, who brought the detectives in with him. They were now evidently in a much more tractable mood. What did I tell you? Ernst Rosius said to them. Roses, and a little note. The short, fat one came over to Frank Braun. I hope you'll enjoy yourself, doctor, and please may I have a rose as a souvenir. I'd like to take it to my wife. Frank Braun divided the bunch of roses into 3 equal parts and gave them to the 3 rogues. Have you a wife too? He asked the thin one. No, the man answered, but I have a girl. The secretary quickly handed a check to Frank Braun. Sign it, please, he said. $300 for the men. Frank Braun signed the check and gave it to one of the men. Then he shook 3 hands and said 3 times, so long. That was cheap, he admitted as soon as the men had gone. How did you do it? Rosius laughed. It is a pity that you gave all the roses away. You might have left me a few for my fiancée. Still the same one? No, a new one since last week. There, the roses, that did the trick. I told the men a nice story about an affair you were having, very secretly, of course, and that you were going on a little honeymoon with the young lady. They appreciated that, and the roses confirmed their belief, and the $100 each. Frank Braun stayed in Torreon, in the state of Chihuahua. In Monterey, he had separated from his companion, who was to go south to Veracruz to join General Carranza. They had decided it would be better to separate, and that each one work alone. If they remained together and went first to Villa and then to Carranza, or the other way around, both Mexicans in turn would have received them with suspicion. He waited. Pancho Villa would come tomorrow or the day after from Durango. Perhaps he would come next week or the week after that, but he would come. He had ordered all his men to assemble here from all parts of the country. He had convoked his men from wherever his name spelled power. From wherever his name spelled power. It was to be a great review of his armies, and they all came, captains and generals with small and large detachments. They camped in the city and outside in the suburbs, in Gomez, Palacio, and Lerdo. Frank Braun rode through the camp, making friends and chatting with the soldiers the whole day long. He had brought all sorts of gadgets with him from New York, cigars that exploded, trick matches that would not burn, and similar clever toys. He gave them away to the officers. Oh, he knew his Mexicans. They enjoyed these silly presents like children. They laughed like schoolboys. These men whose dirty fingers were sticky with shed blood. It was easy to sound them out. They were all for Villa. Of course, he was the strong man, but nobody had any definite idea as to what would happen. Anarchy was rampant here, as it was everywhere in this country. On only one issue, one single issue, they all agreed. Every soldier, from the general down to the last muleteer, every smallest fruit peddler and bootblack, every lawyer and politician, and every woman, from the educated senora down to the harlots in the brothels. That was the hate, the deep-seated, inborn hatred against the gringo, The American was to blame for everything from beginning to end. From him came the money and the weapons with which powerful Diaz was overthrown. Through him fell Madero and Gutierrez and Huerta, and the Carranza men against whom they were fighting also had American money and shot Yankee bullets. And they themselves, the Villistas, well, of course, they were just the trouble. They were killing their own brothers everywhere. Nobody benefited by it except one, the gringo, the American, and they must have no peace or rest. They must keep on fighting each other because Wall Street wished it, and Washington. They were all firmly convinced of that. If only someone would come and lead them, they would be united instantly, all of them. Villistas and Zapatistas, Carranzistas, and Diaz men, all of them from Sonora to Yucatan. Their only hope, their last chance for this country that was being torn to pieces and slowly bleeding to death, was an outside war against the unscrupulous gringo who had within a few years made their beautiful, rich, fertile country the most desolate spot on earth. Why was all this? Why was their enemy, the Yankee, doing this? They knew the answer and they never tired of telling it to Frank Braun. The Americans wanted their country. They wanted to steal the oil fields just as they had stolen California, New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. But they were too cowardly to go right out and take it. They cleverly incited the Mexicans against each other, let them kill their brothers off year after year, and then, when in the whole country scarcely a man would be left to carry a rifle, then the brave Yankee would appear on the scene. Then he would pacify the country. He would take whatever he liked. That was gringo policy. They poured down their agave brandy in large brandy. They poured down their agave brandy in large tumblers, beat their fists on the table, spat, shouted, and raged, and then one man and another and more would break down and sob. Yes, it would be better if the gringos came to finish it all. Soon everything would be over anyway. They groaned like wounded bulls waiting to be put out of their misery by the merciful thrust of the puntilero's dagger. But in New York, the newspaper carried huge headlines. Germans trying to incite Mexico against the United States. Germans? Good God, no. This country was incited by only one, by the Yankee. The following Sunday, Vila rode into town. The city was decorated for the occasion. Torn rugs and colored bedclothes hung from the windows and balconies. There was even a few flags. People stayed in their houses except for the wenches, who leaned out of windows or stood in doorways. They shriekingly returned the bawdy jokes of the incoming troops. The soldiers did not march in formation. They rode or ran through the streets in any way they pleased. Their clothes were in rags and tatters, and they carried a strange assortment of weapons, but all of them wore the huge pointed Mexican sombrero. Frank Braun stood on his little balcony, looking down at the soldiers and waiting for the arrival of the Generalissimo, who had not yet passed by. There was a knock at the door of his room. "Come in," he called, and turned around. A tall, hawk-nosed officer entered, and it struck Frank Braun that this officer, at least, was clean-shaven. "I am sorry to disturb you," the officer said politely, "but I must arrest you." "Who are you?" "I am the general's aide. I am sorry, but you will have to come with me." "Who gave the order?" "I myself," the officer replied. "You are a stranger, and you come from the United States. You have no identification papers. We must investigate. Please follow me." Frank Braun looked at the man carefully. He wore high new leather puttees, and 3 revolvers stuck out from his belt, but he carried a smart riding crop in his hand. He wore no coat and no waistcoat, and his blue shirt was damp and dusty. It was open at the neck, revealing a piece of white ribbon with a blue stripe. "Arbacampus?" Frank Braun asked. The stranger was startled. Nobody ever asked me that question in Mexico. He stepped over to the window and turned back into the room for a better look at Frank Braun. Are you also, he continued? No, no, you are a German. Frank Braun nodded. Yes, I am. And you can go on with your examination right here if you like. Won't you sit down, please? They sat down and talked and quickly understood each other. Frank Braun told the officer that he knew Villa, and that he had been with the general in Sonora 4 years ago when they were riding against Torino. What he wanted here, oh, just to see what the feeling was in this country. The feeling about what? For Villa or Carranza, or for whom? No, he was not interested in that at all, Frank Braun explained. He was interested in one thing only, how they felt about Washington, whether for or against. You hate the Yankees, the aide retorted. Should I love them because their bullets mow down my people? Slowly, the officer said, I am from New York. From Hester Street? Frank Braun asked. You know you're New York, the Jew laughed. Not exactly from Hester Street, but not very far from it. He fell pensive. I am an American citizen. I still am. And I was one, body and soul, as a child, as a boy, and a youth. I firmly believed in equality and liberty, in that great symbol in New York Bay. I did not care for anything that did not fly the stars and stripes until. He stopped, and Frank Braun repeated, until I realized that all this is a damned lie. You see, sir, I was born a soldier. It was my greatest dream. My father did not like it, but my mother approved. She said that I had Maccabean blood in me. I had to learn the tailoring profession, but finally, when I was 20, my mother got me permission to enroll with the 71st Regiment. That is no regular military corps, just a volunteer regiment, a National Guard unit, where they drill a few nights a month, but still, there were uniforms and rifles and sabers. It smacked a little of soldiering. There were posters all over the town, and on every street corner they distributed the propaganda leaflets of the recruiting bureaus, declaring that it was the duty of every patriotic citizen, etc. I was a patriot to the marrow of my bones, and it was my duty, so I applied. He laughed bitterly, and his riding crop whirred through the air. They examined me, and the doctor said I was a magnificent fellow who some day would be the pride of the regiment. But 2 days later came a report that I was unfit for military duty, physically unfit. I wept the whole night, and next morning I ran to see our old physician and had myself examined again. The doctor said that in all New York they couldn't find anybody healthier than I. I saved my weekly pay and went to the leading physicians in town. They examined me thoroughly for hours. I assembled a whole collection of affidavits from the doctors and sent them to the regiment. And again there came a report, unfit for military duty. They did not want me. They refused to have me because I am a Jew. Not even as a common soldier would they take a Jew. He jumped up and held his arm under Frank Braun's nose. There, feel it, feel that, he cried. Frank Braun felt it. The muscles were hard and firm as steel. Then the Jew lifted his right leg. Feel that. There was never a stronger pair of thighs to grip a horse. Again, Frank Braun obliged him, felt the leg, and tried to pinch it. But it was impossible. This leg was as if hewn from rock. Every goddamn flat-footed salesman limps through the streets of New York in a khaki uniform, he shouted. But they did not want me because I am circumcised. I was unfit for military duty. He dropped heavily into his chair and whistled a few bars from the Star-Spangled Banner. They taught me in school that America is the most liberal and the most marvelous country in the world. They probably thought every Jew should be happy and grateful for all eternity as long as an ocean lay between him and the Nagakas of the Tsar's soldiers. But my father's kill does not come from Russia. We are from Galicia. His brother was a rabbi. He made a little money in oil near Drohobych. Drohobych. So he moved to Vienna, and all his children went to college. They all had a much better education than I did. One is an engineer, one a student at the university, and two of them are lieutenants. Now all four of them are fighting at the front against the murderers of our people. That is better than to stay in New York, in the New York ghetto, where all you can do is to fight with your mouth. Again, his writing crop whirred through the air. I read the New York papers, which a friend of mine sends down to me sometimes. Every day they are preaching it, just as they used to in school, that America is the land of the free, that it is freer than any other country in the world. Germany and Austria are enslaved and reactionary, the most backward countries in the world. But over there, my cousins are officers, and here I wasn't good enough to be a common private. He swallowed hard and breathed deeply. The riding crop bent double in his hands. Then he quickly jumped to his feet and offered his hand to Frank Braun. You know my chief, he cried. Fine. I will come for you this afternoon and take you over to see him, and then we can continue our little chat, if you like. Frank Braun heartily returned the clasp of this strong hand. Your name, he asked. The Jew laughed. D. P. Jesus Christ. D. Pedra Perla? D. Pedra Perla. How do you like that? My parents' name in New York is Pearlstone, and my cousins abroad are called Pearlstein. But call me Pearlstein. I prefer it. He opened the door, but turned back again. With all this, I forgot to ask you what you really want here, he said. But if your mission is to work against the Yankees, you can save yourself the trouble. Down here, everybody dreams day and night of nothing but their hate for the gringos who are ruining Mexico. Frank Braun stayed at the inn all afternoon waiting for the general's aid. At last, in the evening, he had his horse saddled and rode into camp to ask for Villa's quarters. The general lived in a hacienda a short distance from the town, and Frank Braun had no difficulty finding it, as the neglected garden of the hacienda swarmed with soldiers who sat and sprawled on the ground smoking innumerable cigarettes. He asked for Villa's aide, Colonel Perla, but none of the soldiers knew the name or could give him any information. Like curious children, they crowded around his horse, eager to help. What did the officer look like, they asked. Slim, tall, smoothly shaven, elegantly looking, very tanned, black hair and dark eyes. They guessed various names, but could not find it. He has a nose like this, Frank Braun said, and drew with his fingers a sweeping curve in the air. Now they laughed and hopped about in great excitement. Oh, yes, him. Why, yes, they knew him very well, the man with the large nose. It was Don Benjamino, of course, and they all shouted and yelled together, Don Benjamino. So Benjamin is his name, Frank Braun thought. Benjamin Pearlstein. A sweat-covered bay mare came cantering up through the bushes. The rider reined her in, jumped down, and threw the reins to a soldier. Oh, here you are, he cried. I have just come for your Fonda. From your Fonda. I thought you would get tired waiting. You must forgive me, but we were very busy this afternoon. He took Frank Braun's arm and led him to the house. The general is in a bad mood today, he said. In a very bad mood. In fact, he is furious. The dancer is disturbing his peace of mind. He laughed and gave a sleeping soldier on the stairs a vigorous kick with his boot. Yes, a Spanish dancer, a wildcat. She has turned all our heads. Pancho Villa and mine. Is it Pancho Villa? Pancho Villa and mine and all the others. She never grants her favors to anyone. She is cold as the ice water they serve you in New York. Frank Braun looked up in surprise. Well, frankly speaking, none of you look as though you would bother much about asking a girl's permission. That's true. It is not the fashion here, the colonel answered, but she gets away with it. The devil knows how. We are all jealous of each other, and so every one is her protector. If you had come a week ago, you would have seen such a welt on my cheek. That was Dolores's signature, she who calls herself Goyita. I put my arms around her, and she got hold of my own whip. Villa, and Perez Domingo, and all the others roared with laughter. But I am not the only one. She has dealt out other blows in this camp. The soldiers call her La Pagona, the beater. They would all go through hell for her. Now they were inside the building and walked across the spacious patio in which a few dying plants stood on marble pedestals. They stopped before a yellow curtain hanging in front of a high opening that served as a door. A few soldiers on guard at the entrance snapped into salute as the colonel approached. Don Benjamin pulled back the curtains and called a few words into the completely darkened room. From the back of the room, he was answered by a curse and an almost unintelligible scowl. The Jew dropped the curtains. Come along, he said. It is better to leave him alone today. He has invited you for tomorrow for the Yarapio in the arena and for supper here afterwards. He will be in a better mood then. You will have an easier time with him. Colonel Pearlstein whistled for the horses. Shall we take a little canter before the sun sets? He suggested. They mounted their horses and trotted them slowly through the hacienda gardens. They stopped at the gate, and the general's aide called a few officers and gave them orders. Suddenly, a strange dizziness took hold of Frank Braun. He heard the colonel's voice, every word and every syllable, but it seemed like a strange, unknown tongue, and at the same time he seemed bereft of all sense of feeling. His thighs no longer gripped the Mexican wooden saddle. They gripped the air. His hands no longer held the reins that dropped slack to the horse's neck. Every ounce of blood seemed to have left his body. Slowly he slumped forward. An officer sprang to his assistance and held him up, and as soon as he felt this human touch, the grip of a strong hand around his waist, it was all over. He could hold the reins again and sit back in the saddle. What happened? The colonel asked. Why, man, you are pale as a ghost. Frank Braun shook his head. It was nothing, just a slight dizziness. He was all right now. But the Jew was not satisfied. I think we'd better go home. What did you eat today? No, that wasn't it. His stomach was always all right. Unless you have eaten poison, then the best stomach won't help you, and many things are possible down here in these times. Frank Braun smiled and told the colonel not to worry. It was just a nervous weakness from which he had been suffering for many months. Maybe so, the officer said, and maybe not. Now you are under my protection, and you must let me take care of you. He helped Frank Braun off his horse, took him up the stone stairs into the fonda and into his room. Lie down on your bed, he said, and rest a few hours. I will come back later to see how you are. He left, and through the open door Frank Braun heard him shouting for the innkeeper and calling in a soldier from the street. He spoke Spanish to the soldier, mixing a few Indian words with it. A yaqui, Frank Braun thought. You, the colonel ordered, stay here. You stand here in the kitchen every time something is cooked. For the gentleman up there. The stranger, you know, the tall one. Do you know him? Yes, the Indian replied. The stranger with the fair hair. That's the one, Pearlstein continued. You see that nothing gets into the food that should not be in it. Do you understand? You have the innkeeper cook double portions, and you taste it yourself and eat half of every dish. Yes, Colonel, the Yaqui cried. He was evidently delighted with this duty. Then the colonel turned to the innkeeper. You heard what I told the soldier. You are responsible to me. If anything happens, you go before a firing squad. So look out. He did not wait for an answer, but went quickly out into the street and mounted his horse. Then there was excited chatter in the patio. Frank Braun got to his feet and closed the door. He was not tired, no, only empty, empty, oh, so empty. The same feeling he had had that time in Philadelphia when he was to speak against Miss Livingstone, that time when he kissed Eva Lockman, that time and again the other time when he went home with Lottie from the opera, and again when he... It happened often now, very often. Sometimes it was just a faint attack, sometimes it was worse, but it had never gripped him as fiercely as today. He consoled himself with the thought that in the intervals between these attacks he was completely well for many weeks at a time, so well that he could not even imagine how it felt when this emptiness took hold of him. Then he remembered that Lottie Van Ness had given him an envelope. When he said farewell to her, there were powders in it, she had told him, in case he should have a severe attack, a little strychnine, and he should take it only if it was absolutely necessary. Where had he put them? He searched in his pockets and found the envelope in his wallet. He opened it, took one of the little paper packages, and emptied the white powder on his tongue, washing it down with a drink of water, and now he would rest. The envelope felt heavy, and he emptied its contents. 4 powders, a sheet of notepaper, and a very small penknife in a fine leather sheath carefully wrapped in cotton. He read the note. It contained a few words in Lottie's quick, oddly bold handwriting. Please take this little knife, carry it for my sake, in the left breast pocket of your shirt. It is brand new and very clean, and the blade is bright and unstained. Do not use it unless you have to. Bring it back to me the way it is. It will mean nothing to you, but to me, everything. He took the knife out of its case. It was made of platinum and had the symbol of scorpion engraved on one side and the symbol of cancer on the other. He opened its single blade, a magnificent thin steel blade that shone in the last rays of the evening sun. It had a very sharp point, and its edge was as keen as that of a razor. Why did she give it to me, he thought, and yet, wrapped carefully in cotton and in the soft leather sheath, he placed it in the small breast pocket of his shirt, on the left side, over his heart. And that's the end of chapter 5. And so far, this book is not very good. Not happy about it. Especially since I paid $200 for it. Oh well. That's all, bros. Goodbye.